also record to the cloud. Great. Okay. So before we go through our training outline, I'd love to introduce some of today's facilitators. So yeah, I'll start with myself, I guess, and then I'll popcorn pass it. I'm Victoria. I use she and her pronouns. I'm calling in from San Francisco. And I'm the team lead of our Knowledge is Power program. I'm joined today by two of my teammates, both Lisa and Juan. Um, and so I'll pass it over to Juan to introduce himself.
Hey y'all, happy Tuesday. Happy to be here. I'm Juan Gonzalez. I have been a helpline volunteer for at least a year now, Lisa, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a little bit over. And it's been a really fun adventure, a really fun ride. I'm always excited to learn more about any and all things tenant law and tenant rights. So I'm excited to share this space with you all and be able to offer some of that information to you too. I'm calling in from Oakland in the Bay Area, although I'm originally from down south in Orange County. It's nice to be here. Lisa?
Thank you so much, Juan and Victoria. My name is Lisa. I am the helpline coordinator here at Tenants Together. I am in Southern California, Riverside County to be exact. And I am so happy to be here and so happy to have Juan in this space, who you were right, it has been a little bit over a year. So we are just so grateful faces returning and to see some new faces tonight. We have a full agenda and I am so excited to dig in with y'all. I'll pass it back to you, Victoria.
Thanks, Lisa and Juan. Thank you for being present and sharing your gifts with everyone in this space. So grateful to have your voice here as well. So I dropped in the chat just kind of like a time outline for the different sections, as well as when we're planning on taking some breaks. We know that this is a long night and we're going to be going through some heavy topics, so we want to make sure that we have some breaks as well. But here's kind of the outline and the goals for today's training. We're going to start by kind of doing kind of like a political grounding, and we call that section Housing Justice for Collective Liberation. And then we're going to talk about how we even got any of the protections that we have today. And that was by taking action through collect and finding collective solutions to involve all tenants. Then we're going to go ahead and review what are some of the California state laws with a focus today from Juan's help on security deposits and housing repairs and habitability. All right, next slide. All right, y'all. So this is where we're going to hear a little bit of me talking about that political grounding. Um, and we're going to start on the next slide here with a quote from Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. I'm actually going to ask, would there be a brave audience member that would want to come off chat and go ahead and read the quote you see on the screen?
I can read it.
Thanks, Miss Loretta.
Everything in U.S. history is about the land, who oversaw and cultivated it, fished its waters, maintained its wildlife, who invaded and stole it, how it became a commodity, real estate, broken into pieces to be bought and sold on the market.
Thank you so much, Miss Loretta. Can people give snaps and appreciation to Miss Loretta in the chat or reactions? We love to see it. I see some claps for you. So, in their book, Roxanne Dunbar Artis, excuse me, provides a real vital lens of our U.S. history as one that what happens to the land really defines then what happens to all the people as well, right? Um, and I like that she reminds us here that the system of like real estate or like land as a commodity and that ownership that so many of us feel maybe like the natural order of things wasn't isn't necessarily, and that it actually was brought here by colonization. And that from also from the beginning, she talks about who stole it, so that it was also based off of theft, right? Of indigenous lands. Um, and I think like the history kind of lends and brings shines light onto what happens present day as well, right? And how we got to where we are today, where we see people being kicked out of their homes and off of their land that maybe they and their parents or their grandparents and their kiddos that they brought in, have lived on for generations or that they call home today. So when we're fighting for tenant rights, what is it that we're fighting for here at Tenants Together? And we're fighting for housing as a human right, the right of the people to their homes, the right of the people to their communities, and the right of the people to the land. So next slide. Okay. On the next slide here, we have a old-timey poster from the 1950s. Could someone come off mute and please read what the poster says?
The man who owns his home is a better worker, husband, father, citizen, and a real American.
Thank you, Blessing. Can we give some appreciate for Blessing? What a beautiful name, by the way. Yes, I see all the loves in the chats. Thank you, and the reactions. So I'm going to ask the group to think about this quote, and I would love some responses in the chat. What is this poster suggesting about people who don't own their homes, right? The man who owns their home is this. What does it suggest about people who don't own their homes? And we'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. Less than working class slander, not better, right? White American, they aren't real Americans. Less than, absolutely. Defining the difference in working class, that they're not real Americans. Wow, great responses, everyone. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's saying that they are worse at being fathers, they're worse at being workers, they're worse at being citizens. It just means that they're less than, right? So you start to kind of see this, they don't provide value, at least, right? Exactly. This kind of othering of people who, thank you, Carlo, no le gusta trabajar, they don't like to work. Um, you start to see this kind of othering that's happening about landowners and non-landowners or homeowners. So, well, today what we're going to do is we're going to look at how this right to land ownership throughout US history has, to be honest, systemically been afforded to only a few people, right? And it's mainly people that look like this on the poster, right? Male, right? Women couldn't even have their own credit card or their own bank account for a really long time. So they were men. They were mainly white as well. Yeah, exactly. White man, Nicole. Thank you. Um, so at the same time, right, there was this powerful myth then that was created that everyone has the right to own land so long as you work hard for it. And this has really been woven into the fabric of America, right? This, if you just work hard and stay the grind, you too can get access to this. But this myth that anyone can own land so long as they work hard enough has helped to create that othering, has created an image of the tenant that is used to justify all the evictions, all the homelessness, and all the lack of access to housing and displacement that we see now today and every day. Okay, next slide. So thinking about owning by exclusion and owning by theft. So when when the Pilgrims first came to the United States, was the land empty? No, of course not. The land was not empty. And the land that we call the United States uh, was originally called by the indigenous people that lived here Turtle Island. Um, there before colonization or before 1491, it was estimated that there was 112.5 million indigenous people. And so we see on this map the different tribes. And you'll also see on this map that a lot of the times the tribes shared, right? Shared common areas, common land, and really saw land as belonging to all creatures that existed on it. So you'll see there's kind of overlapping of colors and of lines. So noticing that these boundaries between territories, they're not fixed, right? They're not these perfect kind of squares that we normally see maps kind of created as today. These territories, they fluctuated. And the idea of this private property as the custom and now a legal practice of splitting the land into these perfectly symmetrical, cleanly delineated parcels is really not natural. And it's actually an invention that was brought and now has been upheld by a political system. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Owens. Absolutely. Redlining. And we'll talk about that in the slides to come. So early property relations, for instance, were defined by collective ownership and a common resource with villages, right? With like villages of people sharing these common resources, sharing farming land, sharing access to waterways and things like that. It wasn't this individualized, and only an individual can own this perfect square of land. Um, that we now see those perfect delineated squares being owned and operated by just a few, to be honest. Let's move to the next slide. We might have to click through it a few. Could someone please read the quote on the screen?
I can read it.
Thank you, Elise.
That you have property as proof of industry and foresight on you or your father's part, that you have nothing as judgment of your laziness and vices or of your improvidence. John Hay, Secretary of State. Tenants were denied the vote in federal elections until 1860.
Thank you, Elise. Snaps for Elise. Thank you, Elise, for coming off and being brave, using your voice. All right, so during the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, the United States really started to wage campaigns against indigenous folks and started to take a seizure of their native lands. And many of these laws, unfortunately, were in direct violation of treaties that the US had signed with the tribes. And so if we think about this, immigrants, these settler immigrants, I should say, right? These pilgrim immigrants and homesteaders, they believed that the West was empty land, and to our indigenous folks, it was home. So they took this land and then they created laws that secured their land ownership. And then at the same time, the Secretary of State kind of gave them a backhanded compliment of saying, or not even a compliment, but made this backhanded comment that if you have no land, that you are lazy. And it's proof of your improvidence, proof of your, not your foresight, your inability to be successful, right? But they had taken it unfairly. The painting of land ownership as the result of good morals and hard work and the symbol of freedom, that inevitably meant that anybody who didn't have ownership of land, or meant that anybody who then became a tenant or had was experiencing tenancy or being a renter, or not owning land, was seen as a result of being immoral and not hardworking, right? And so the sentiment that this sentiment and the political gains attached to it is reflected in prejudice, right? Tenants faced at that time. So at that time, if you were a renter, you experienced othering, you experienced disenfranchisement, you experienced not having a voice. You were not allowed to vote. They were trying to eliminate their power to participate in in your civil duties, in your civil activities. Like you couldn't vote for president, but these folks who could and owned your land were making all the decisions for you. And this came in and was has been upheld and as a political system, and as well as the theft and seizure and the physical system of stealing, taking the land. Um, so that's why we titled this slide, The History of Tenants and Landlord is really the history of property and power in the United States. And that's what we're talking about. All right, next slide. So this political system, right, that started to be designed, and we've already heard from Miss Owens in the chat, things like redlining. We start to see that very intentionally through systemic exclusion. So the system of land ownership, which equals to wealth in this country, which also equals to power in this country, as we just reviewed in the slide before, this was developed by and for those who had taken the land, landowners, and kind of the elite class. And at the beginning of settler colonialism, rest on this idea of systemic exclusion that benefits only a very, very few people, but really harms many more. So we'll see kind of the harm in the policy, this political harm that we begin to see. So we've already reviewed the theft of indigenous land. We then see it through the kidnapping and enslavement of the African peoples, from all the way up until 1865, if not beyond. We have to acknowledge that this country's economy and the wealth of the economy and the wealth of the landowning few was built on slavery. And the prosperity associated with land ownership relied fundamentally on the systemic exclusion of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, the violent exploitation of their labor, and the genocide of their people as well. And then we continue to see this um, until about 1868, when enslaved African peoples were considered three-fifths of a citizen and had no rights to own land or to any of the wealth their labor produced. And we continue through history with the exclusion of people from land owning through the Black Codes and Jim Crow. Even after emancipation, it became a new system of exploitation. We saw laws known as the Black Codes that restricted the movement of Black communities and their ability to access basic human rights. We also saw this through the Aliens Lands Acts, which in 1879, it limited land ownership to only members of the white race of North of Europe, as well as Northern, and then they defined Europe, Northern Africa, Morocco, and South African descents. So where the Europeans colonized. So if you were from those areas, you were the only, and of the white race, the Aliens Land Act excluded everyone else from owning land. And we saw that even with the creation of the Federal Housing Administration, which was designed initially to create opportunities for home ownership, but because of a system called redlining, mortgages were only afforded to folks of the white race as well. So on the next slide, let's talk about redlining and kind of the impacts of redlining. And we've already kind of heard some folks highlight redlining. But I want to ask the group, because I want to, together we know a lot is one of our community agreements. So who would like to share what they know about redlining? Would anyone like to share what they know about redlining? And feel free to come off mute or use the chat.
Quizás las áreas rojas era donde,
The red
donde solo
areas
podían vivir personas de
is
color
only where people of color could live in,
y que se podía ver como no, que como que
that
eran, por decirlo,
could
en
be
estos
seen
tiempos, el área ghetto,
like the area, the ghetto area, if you could say it like that.
supongo.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caro. Thank you for that. That's correct, yes. And I'm also going to read from the chat as well. We see Ms. Owen saying redlining is an illegal discriminatory practice where financial institutions like banks and insurance companies refuse or heavily restrict services such as mortgages and loans to residents of specific neighborhoods based on their race, ethnicity, rather than the individual's creditworthiness. Thank you. Juan said it was a practice supported by the federal government, correct? I have friends that live in Marin City and was victimized due to redlining. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, we still feel the impacts of redlining and these political systems to try to limit our power and our ability to access land. It's a very real thing. So I'm just gonna expand upon what you all already said, right? So everyone was correct, and I really appreciate you all sharing. So can we give some claps to Caro and everyone else who shared in the chat? Some reactions, some appreciation. Thank you all for sharing your experience, and your insights. Wonderful. Thank you. So redlining, it was a federal rating system that was officially, it was supposed to ensure the stability of home loans in a specific neighborhood. And like one and others said, it was used by the Federal Housing Administration. And like Miss Owen said, to decide who gets the American dream of owning a home and who was not, kind of like what Gato said as well. So areas that were good for investments and therefore got home loans, were rated A and they were marked on the map with green. And then the areas that were considered higher risk for giving them a home loan were rated D and were in the color red. In the 1930s, so the appraisal industry, which Ms. Owens had mentioned, said that opposed the mixing of races, which they believed could cause the decline of both the human race, but more importantly, property values. So they ensured segregation through the property rating system that we talked about. And a great author and historian and activist, Tanahashi Coates, he really explains it well. Neighborhoods where Black people lived were rated D and were usually considered ineligible for the home Federal Housing Administration backing. They were colored in red. Neither the percentage of Black people living there nor their social class mattered. Black people were viewed as a contagion. Redlining went beyond just the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, backed loans, and it actually just spread to the entire mortgage industry, which is already rife with racism, excluding Black people from the most legitimate means of obtaining a mortgage. And like Nicole said, it's still happening in many communities, this practice. So one of our partner organizations talks about the impacts of redlining as gentrification. Who would like to share what they know about gentrification? Feel free to come off mute or put it in the chat.
El aburgacimiento sorry, empieza cuando
It starts
los
when
desarrolladores
the
toman
developers take
edificios, una
buildings
cuadra completa,
or a whole block.
construyen
They
viviendas
build
muy elegantes
housing
para luego darlos muy
very
caro
fancy and then sell
y,
them very expensive.
y sacan a los que ya viven
And
ahí
they remove the
pagando
people that
una
live there
renta
that are paying
se dice
a
accesible.
a
Y
more
también es
accessible
cuando
rent.
empiezan a
And that's when
construir
they start building
tiendas que la
like
gente que
stores
está en la
that
comunidad no
people
usa.
Yeah.
that
Es,
are in comfort
no es lo
don't
a lo que
use.
estén
It's not
acostumbrados.
what they're
Es
used
cuando
to.
empieza el
It's when the
aburgacimiento y está
gentrification
sucediendo demasiado aquí en Los
happens, and
Ángeles,
it happens a
donde yo
lot in
vivo.
Los Angeles, specifically where I live.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Caro. Can we give some snaps and appreciation and love to Caro? What a terrific definition. And I see in the chat, so many have felt that same experience of you, Caro, in Los Angeles, right? People all the way in Boston, Massachusetts have also felt that, right? And how California is no different from any other state in experiencing that. So thank you, Caro, for that beautiful description. I'm just going to add to what Caro already said. And this definition comes actually from one of our partner organizations here at Tenants Together. And like Caro was describing, gentrification is a profit-driven process that changes the class as well as the race characteristics of a neighborhood. It tears apart working class communities and displaces us from our homes and the neighborhood resources and networks we've created. It is a process, right, that disproportionately impacts Black communities, Latino communities, Asian communities, immigrant communities, working class communities, neighborhoods, cities, and whole regions because of the historic redlining and lack of investment by local and state governments into that community. And then that creates the opportunity for these big developers, like Gato was saying, these big real estate speculation and neighborhood flipping, right? Where they turn the neighborhood into something you don't recognize, stores that you don't recognize anymore. And that generates profit, like these new buildings and these new stores, for only a certain amount of people, but it pushes everyone else out. I think I saw a hand. Did someone want to add? Did I see a hand? Okay, maybe not. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. And like on the next slide, I want to bring up the mood a little bit, right? Because yes, there has been policy after policy to try to harm working class communities, communities that are mostly renters and tenants. Um, but there's also been a really long, beautiful history and legacy of the community fighting back against this displacement, of gentrification, of redlining, of the Alien Lands Acts, of Jim Crow. There's always been that pushback. And so that's what we're going to talk about on the next couple slides, is that all of the tenant protections we had today was not given to us by the government freely. It was something that we have to and had to fight for. So it goes back as early as 1904, right? In 1904, where you see this picture here of Jewish women, immigrant Jewish women, and they lived in Harlem, New York. And they led the very first rent strike after their landlord tried to raise the rent during a housing shortage. So, through mutual aid and ongoing resistance, they were able to not pay rent, withhold their rent for a very long time until the landlord finally met with them and they renegotiated new leases as well as a decrease in their rent. And I love that it was led by women, right? Because women are often the caretakers of the home. And they're the ones that have consider and think about, where do I have to raise my children? What schools are they going to? So yeah, I love to see that it was women that led that. We continue, right? And what I really wanted to share here was we continue to see the fight from into the 1930s, where we saw unions like labor unions and working class people who were not getting fair wages upset at their inability to continue to make rent. And so we saw sharecroppers and farm workers strike and resist. And the cool thing about it is in the 1930s, we saw the Southern Tenant Farmers Union and the Sharecroppers Union that were predominantly Mexican migrants organizing. So they organized across race lines. So it was kind of the unity of the working class people across race lines. So we saw the Black communities in the Southern Tenant Farmer Union, as well as the white communities, and the sharecroppers of the Mexican migrant communities working together um, to fight for lower rents and fair wages. Um, it's all of that organizing efforts united these landless laborers whose exploitation and exclusion from land ownership, they were the backbone of the agriculture industry, right? And we saw that from the 30s, this huge kind of cross race, cross working class people solidarity. We gained enough power as renters that in the 1940s, we were able to pass federal rent control law. That's amazing. I mean, it took us all the way until 2019 to get a rent cap here in the state of California. But in 1942, because working class people united, we had federally, so across the whole United States, rent control. And I think that's a really powerful part of our history that we have to share. So what was kind of happening around then, right? So there was housing construction that slowed down because of there was a war going on, kind of like today. And at the same time, more people moved to the cities for jobs. And it was kind of more defense related jobs at the time. So landlords began increasing rents and people responded by demanding affordable housing. So I don't know, it feels kind of like now, doesn't it? What if we all organized for, oh, we'll get to that. Let's go to the next slide. All right, y'all. So let me just check where I am at time, and I might have to speed through a couple of these slides. Let's see. Time-wise. Okay. Got a few more minutes and then we'll take a break. Okay, good. So I have time to go through more events in history. I get excited talking about this. Um, Continuing through the 1950s, unfortunately, our um, federal rent control was overturned a few years after 1942 or 42, yeah. And a instead what we were able to win, we lost, so it was like one step forward instead of two steps back. It was like one step forward, 1.5 steps back, because in 1942 we were not able to hold on to the federal rent control, but we did win an Emergency Price Control Act federally. And this act was passed and it put a price control on rent as well as other necessary goods and services in order to combat inflation and ensuring, or excuse me, as well as other necessary goods and services in order to combat inflation, right? So what we were seeing during wartime is there was less workers because they were going off to war, so there was less products. And when there's less products available, the prices started to go up. So kind of like in COVID, if you remember, the cost of toilet paper went up really high because people couldn't go work in the factories. And so there was this Emergency Price Control Act that prevents people from jacking up prices. And that includes rent, right? Because in this country, housing is still not a human right. It's a good. It's considered a good or a service. So we did win the Emergency Price Control Act. So when there are things like fires or when there are things like a global pandemic that our inflation doesn't go up on the goods and services we need. So we did win that, even if we couldn't keep it forever. Um, and in the 1960s and 50s, we really started to see tenant organizing in a response to urban renewal or removal, and white flight. So it was urban renewal was kind of a violent process of redlining. We were talking about gentrification as being kind of a process of redlining. Well, urban renewal, they actually took tanks and bulldozers and would bulldoze down communities or homes that they felt were blighted or in the name of clearing out the slums. And to stop that urban renewal, we saw um, some amazing tenant organizing and the formation of the Black Panther Party. And they stood in defense of Black communities in Oakland, Bay Area, and progressed to other cities as well across the United States. If not, I think even the globe. I think they had chapters all around the world. And they had a 10-point program with a list of 10 demands. And number 4 on their demands was for decent housing. And so we saw uh, the Black Panther Party go and put their bodies on the line and stand in front of these tankers and in front of these police officers that were trying to remove their homes. And they were successful in preventing some, but not all, of the destruction of their community. Um, Me and Lisa got to go on a tour in West Oakland, and we got to see some of the homes that were saved by the Black Panther Party. So community organizing um, is a really strong tool when we're coming against these violent policies. Oh, I love that. You have family legacy of part of being the Black Panthers. That's incredible. Um, all right, next slide. Okay. Another really cool example of community organizing to fight evictions was the International Hotel in San Francisco. And they called it the Third World Resistance. So the International Hotel was one of the last remaining homes of what had been a thriving Manila town. And Manila town is like an endearing term for like Filipino and Asian community in San Francisco. Um, However, this company called the Milton Meyer Company, which was a private for-profit developer. And they were trying to cash in on this idea of urban renewal, which was the old school gentrification. And they purchased the hotel, which homed hundreds of families. And they announced that they wanted to demolish it and create a parking lot instead of the keeping it as a home, which would displace mostly elder Filipino and Chinese residents. And it actually sparked a very strategic and brilliant community organizing effort. And it was a 10-year fight that they defended and remained in their homes. So for 10 years, through their community organizing and strategies, they were able to stay housed and fight the bulldozers trying to clear up their community. So that's also really cool. And so that was right, 1968, and then coming into the 70s, um, we really see some amazing and community organizing specific around the formation of tenant unions. So that's when we saw like Berkeley Tenant Union, and they were formed in response to substandard living conditions. And that's when we saw the very first wave of rent control being passed on a local level through the community organizing. And it passed in 12 cities. Um, and they won rent control laws, but they called it rent stabilization. So kind of hear that word interchangeably. And some of which of those laws are still in effect today. So I'm going to shout out kind of the great history. So that came from cities like Berkeley, San Francisco, West Hollywood, Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, Oakland, Palm Springs, Hayward, San Jose, East Palo Alto, Thousand Oaks, and Santa Monica. So if you heard your town being shouted out, I'd love to see a reaction. And let's give thanks and applause to the great history that we saw of community organizing to pass the first rent control. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the applause. If you heard your town, love to see the applause. Yes. Awesome. Okay, next slide. And the fight continues, right? Into 2000s, right? We started to see in California in the 1997s through 2001, right? A big dot-com boom that happened, right? In tech that came into California, tech companies, right? So we've been fighting gentrification for a while now as our community. And we've been successful in standing up for our communities. In 2009, after the big, do y'all remember in 2008 on Wall Street when Wall Street bros um, messed around and basically bet against banks and the um, and mortgages and the bank industry, and they inflated all the costs of the mortgages, and then everybody started losing their homes. Well, California renters were being evicted, and so they stood up and they fought back and they demanded on a statewide level, which is really hard to do on a statewide level. And we were able to pass the California Protecting Tenants at Foreclosure Act, and that passed in 2009, which is a huge, huge win. We were also able to unite and take down Prop 98 campaign that was amidst the foreclosure crisis. And we saw the realtors and apartment association, they came together, and what they tried to do was ban rent control in the entire state. But Tenants Together was formed at that time, and we brought a coalition, so representation from all the cities and all the counties. And we went up to the state, we marched up to San Francisco, and we were successful in defeating that bill from passing, despite real estate putting millions of dollars in lobbying against it. And we've been able to build momentum since 2008, 2009. And it takes time, just like the I Hotel, it took 10 years, but we were able to, in 2019, pass on a statewide level the Tenant Protection Act, AB 1482. And it was signed into law on October 13th. And it went into action January 1st, 2020. The universe works in mysterious ways. So AB 1482, it provides an annual rent cap of which we'll get to talk about in the next slides coming up, as well as eviction protections and relocation assistance. So yeah, they try to take us down, but little do they know when they buried us, we were seeds and we have grown and we've grown stronger as tenants and renters. So we're going to go to the next slide. And we have to continue to fight, right? In 2020, it didn't stop. If anything, the world got harder. Right? We saw the uprising for Black lives, and we saw communities coming out and fighting against the redlining and gentrification and the police brutality of Black communities and Brown communities. We saw in 2021 fights for against COVID rent debt, right? When people were losing hours at work. We saw the Veritas Tenant Union, and they were able to withhold rent. So they just did not pay rent for, I think, a year and a couple months. If there's any Veritas tenants on here tonight, love to hear from you. And they were able to obtain back rent forgiveness. So for the months that they couldn't make rent, they just erased it. So the fight is continues, right? We're fighting immigration crackdown and we're fighting for a free Palestine, which is very much related to lands and tenant rights. And today I'll share with you guys, or excuse me, at the end of the training, I'll share with you all a way we can put pressure on our legislator to pass a bill that would protect our immigrant tenants who are unable to go to work because of fear for ICE or being obtained by ICE. So I'll share with that at the end of tonight's training how you can reach out to your legislator and demand that they pass our bill to protect immigrant tenants. But with that, there's still much more that we have to fight for, right? So we believe at Tenants Together, there is an alternative to exclusion and displacement, and that it's possible to have stability and freedom. And this can happen through things like stronger rent protections, collective models of ownership in social housing, community leadership and empowerment as well. All right, with that, let's take a 10-minute break. We've kind of gone through the history piece and we've learned about how strong tenants are in the fight, but let's go ahead and take a break. And then we're going to talk about how you all can organize for stronger protections for you and your family and community. And I'll do best to answer the questions in the chat, but let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So it's 6:15. Let's return and let me make sure I have my time right. It's 6:15. I think I said a 10-minute break. So we'll come back at 6:25. So return at 6:25. All right, y'all. Thank you. We'll see you at 6:25. Take a 10-minute break. All right, y'all. If you can hear my voice, please add an emoji to the chat or use the reaction if you can hear my voice. Thank you for the reactions. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Incredible. Thank you all for the reactions. All right, so we are moving on to the next section of our training where we're going to talk about how you all can take action towards collective solutions. Because I think what's really important for us to kind of be grounded in is that in our history, we saw in this timeline that we just reviewed, we saw that these are systemic policies, right, that have caused a lot of harm. And it would be impossible for one individual alone to find a solution to this whole system failure, right? That was designed by many evil minds. So, what is needed is actually a collective response, right? Where we all leverage the fact that there are more of the us than there are of the few land owning elite, right? Right? We talk about that 1%. Well, we're the 99% then. And so that is where our power lies. And that is also together we know a lot. So that's also where the solutions lie as well. So on the next slide, I want to kind of ground us in practices to protect your health and joy because there's no such thing as community care without self-care first, right? We have to be able to show up to this whole. My mom always likes to say to me, she always reminds me, I just talked to her this afternoon, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? You have to be so full that that you're overflowing, that you can give back into your community. And so, each person's emotional, spiritual, and personal well-being is necessary to the health of our organizations, our unions, and our movement. And we take care of ourselves and each other. So we have some practices on the screen, and I really invite you to use one today, maybe during today's training. There's things like body scanning, right? Taking account of your body, starting from your head, moving down to your toes, just being intentional about being inside your body and feeling into your body. And a very easy one that I like to do even while I'm presenting is belly breathing, right? So making sure put your hands on your stomach, and when you inhale, you want your belly button to move away from your spine. So you want to make your hands lift up off your belly, right? So make sure you're belly breathing. When you exhale, your belly button goes back to your spine and your hands move back down. That will activate the vagus nerve, which connects to your brain, and your stress response. So make sure you're belly breathing. Another easy thing is arm right circles, shoulder circles. And of course, you can shake it out if you need. So I hope tonight that you commit to one of these practices during the training. I'd love you all to take a moment and just list which practice are you going to hold for yourself in tonight's training? What are you going to practice in tonight's training? If you could please put that in the chat. Love to see your responses. Belly breathing, mindful breathing in my seat, shoulder rolls. Yes, thank you. Thanks, y'all. Shake it out. Shake it out. All right, next slide. All right. So we're going to talk a lot about resilience and the practices of resilience that allow for the foundations of change, right? So, resilience is the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful in the face of grief, loss, and destruction. The ability to face challenges, bounce back, and recover. Our resilience is about our ability to live in our wholeness, and our resilience supports our capacity to demand a change in the conditions, right? And so, how do we change the conditions, right? We're going to kind of go through the how now. So, whether you're coming here as a policy advocate, a tenant rights counselor, a volunteer with Tenants Together, a tenant organizer, the foundations for change are exactly the same. Who would like to read from the list? We'd love to hear your voice. What are the foundations for change?
I'll read.
Thanks, Krista.
Sure. Foundations for organizing. Build relationships, inform and educate, motivate to take action, build community power, and organize. And foundations of counseling are build relationships, inform and educate, motivate to take action, build community power, organize. And they're exactly the same.
That's right, Krista. Thank you. They're exactly the same. No matter where you're coming at it, they're exactly the same. So when we talk about build relationships, that's really about building trust. So what are some ways to build trust? Oh, and before I move on, let's give some snaps to Cristal for coming off mute. Thank you, Cristal. Let's give some reactions and appreciation for being brave and using your voice in this space. Thank you, friend. So good to see you. All right. So building relationships is about building trust. What are some ways that we can build trust in community, right? That's through active listening. That's leading with compassion. Another way to build relationships and trust, share your personal story, issues with tenant rights that you might have experienced in your past. And of course, asking those open-ended questions, really wanting to learn how others are experiencing the same issues that you might be trying to change. Right? Stories matter. Thank you so much. That's very true. Next is inform and educate, right? Inform and educate, or the ability to really articulate what the issues are, right? Making sure that we inform people that the issue that's happening is not just happening to you as an individual, it's actually happening to all of us, as we just learned through that historic timeline, right? Another way we can articulate the problem and educate people is by sharing resources and the information that you have, maybe the information that you learned along the way in your own fight, maybe the strategies that you've had to use to stay housed. And of course, we want to articulate that you can only enforce your rights when you build power with neighbors, as we saw from those examples. The only way that our forefathers and foremothers were able to go up against these big political systems was when they organized in solidarity as a working class community, despite race lines, right, or religion. The next is motivate to take action, right? So this is really giving folks an opportunity for concrete next steps, right? Is that taking action. It's that self-determination of tenants to take this next step to relieve themselves of the current situation. None of us are Superman here, at least that I'm aware of. Like, we're not Superman. We don't wear a cape and we don't fly around with super strength. So it's going to have to take them being involved and actually leading and taking that next step. We can't push them towards it because they might fall. They have to be the ones to step into it and into their power. And how do we get them to step into their power? By being very clear about what concrete next steps they can take. Right? Clear is kind, as me and Lisa like to remind each other. Clear is kind. All right. Last, or not lastly, we have a few more is build community, right? That's through majority, right? Building community is being a majority, right? Leveraging that power. Building community is identifying the leaders that are among us, right? Not all heroes wear capes, right? So it's important to understand who is in our network already and how can I be in closer community with them? Because we're going to need all five fingers to pack a punch, right? And to really make the change in the solutions we want to see. So we're going to need everybody in every lane. And of course, power, right? So working with organizers to create power structures and analysis, right? We need to be the North Star of in our conversations. We need to show them the North Star. And sometimes that means working outside of the law, right? And we need to be continue and move forward and follow up as well. That's how we build power, right? Because the law might actually say that it's legal to increase the rent more than 10%. But wages are not going up 10%. What's legal is not what's always right, right? And so our power might be that we have to be creative. It might mean that we do a Facebook campaign, right? So we need to understand by doing that analysis, right? And having that strategy. We have to be really disciplined and principled in strategy in that way. And then, of course, organize. This is about actions and tactics, right? These are things like civil disobedience, right? Or working on a political level to actually change the law. Like we had federal rent control in 1942. That's amazing. They changed the law. And that was through organizing and using their power. All right, so these are the foundations for change. Amazing, right? Using a petition is a great ability to leverage our power. It invites people into community and is absolutely an organizing tactic. Thank you, Sister Owens, for sharing that. That's so cool. And if you have a link, you have 32 people here who would love to sign it. All right, we're going to move to the next slide. Which is identifying organizing potential in conversations. Right? So, or actually, you know what? I skipped ahead. Let's look first at our advocate toolbox. I'm sorry about that, Lisa, for the slides, if I confused you. Let's start with the advocate toolbox. All right. So I just want to recognize that every single one of you comes to this work and to this fight with an invisible backpack of experience, of skill sets, of teachings, of perspectives. So all of you already have a full toolbox. available to you at any time in any situation that's applicable and can apply to the tenant rights movement. So you don't need to go out shopping and buy yourself a new toolbox. What you have and what you bring is a value add. So I just want to start by saying that. And in addition to that, as being part of the tenant movement, we get to share our toolbox and you get access to more tools, right? Things like sample letters that we have on our Tenants Together website. And I'll go ahead and share a link to those in the chat. And I'll make sure I get the one in Spanish too for our Spanish speakers. Right? So we have things like sample letters. We have things like our body scans and belly breathing that we grounded in earlier. And one thing that we're going to practice today is we have our tenant rights conversation script. But before I move on, I'm curious, what tools have you used to support yourself as a renter or your neighbors? I hear AI is a tool that's been used. Absolutely. Thanks, Matthew, for sharing. All right, next slide. So we talked about, and what we're going to focus on next is a tenant conversation script, a tenant advocate conversation script. And in this conversation script, we're going to pair you all off into different breakout rooms, and we'll actually get some practice with the script. But before I do that, I want to check time, and I also kind of want to introduce the script to you guys as well. Okay. All right. So let's actually move into the activity. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the breakout rooms feature right now. Oh, I should have done this beforehand. This is on me. And let me just make sure I don't have the interpreters because we don't want to lose the interpreters. Here's So Lisa, just for the slides, we're going to scoot on over to the tenant rights conversation activity slide. Just so you're aware. Okay. And then let me grab the link to that script and I'll put that in the chat. Okay. So we have it in English and Spanish. All right. Okay, so what we're going to do next, thank you guys for your patience with me. We're going to spend about 15-ish minutes in the breakout rooms. And each participant will have a chance to role play, one as a tenant and one as an advocate. The advocate will use the script and have a conversation with the tenant. So you'll need to identify who's going to play which part. And your goal using the script is to encourage that tenant to work with their neighbors to address the issue that they're presenting to you. Okay. Um, at the end, or actually during the conversation, you as the advocate are going to start listening out for if you feel like this tenant is actually in a position and willing to work with their neighbors, and if they are a potential leader as well to join you in the movement for tenant rights. Does that kind of make sense? So you can either, because I'm going to put you into, let's see, rooms. We're going to do about 2 people per room. Okay. And you're going to go through the script together in that way. And then let me make sure I put all the Spanish speakers together. I'm sorry, y'all. Thank you for being patient with me as I put the right languages together. Okay. I did that. All right. Thank you, Caro. Thank you. Were folks able to access the script okay? So one person's going to be a tenant and you're going to come up with an issue. Maybe it's a repair that hasn't been met, or you're afraid your rent is going up too much and you can't pay. One person's going to be the advocate. You're going to go through the steps and use the script and talk through the steps in the script with the tenant. And your goal is to get them to try to take action with their neighbor. And as you're listening to see if that person is ready and willing to join you in the movement. All right. So we're going to take now until 7 p.m. to do that. So I went ahead and I opened the rooms, and go ahead and join your teammates in there. Oh, wow. It says rooms will close in 42 minutes. So I'll have to remember to close it before then. Oops, it looks like somebody dropped off. I wonder if they'll join back. Otherwise, I'll move somebody in.
If you need me to fill in for any breakout room, feel free to assign me.
Oh, thank you, Juan. Yeah, it looks
Mhm.
like that somebody dropped off. So I'm gonna add you to um be with Richard
Okay.
in room 9. So let me go ahead and do that. Thank you, Juan.
Okay, I somehow got kicked out, and
Okay.
I was in the group with, I believe Richard was his name, and we were trying to pull up the oh goodness.
The script?
Yeah, and it kicked me completely out, and yeah.
I'm sorry, Miss Owens. Um,
Hmm. Let's
Okay,
see.
I just added the script to the chat, and then I think if you select are you on your phone?
Yes.
If you select the three buttons for more, do you have an option does it say breakout rooms?
Okay, let me go there. Da, 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 da. Boop.
Okay. Uh-oh, okay, we lost somebody. Let's see. Hi, Jobney. We're gonna put you back with your partner and hopefully they can hear you. So you should get an invite to a room in just a second. I think it's room 4.
Hi, Victoria. We got put back in. I was with in the Spanish speaking room, but she wasn't able to access the document at all. I tried to
Okay.
share it a few times, but she was trying to see if she could access this room again.
The main room?
Yeah, I don't know if they knew how to. And so I told them I would come in.
Okay, let me see. Main session. Okay. Just invited them. Move to main session. Thanks, Cristal. See if they join.
Ay, me salí, no sé si me puede regresar el cuarto, estaba yo con Cristal.
Okay, ya, claro que sí. Yo sé que usted tiene problemas con acceso del documento.
Ujú.
Okay, so me voy a um, encontrar otro enlace y si vamos a ver si eso funciona o no. Let me see. Go to file. Okay. This- no, no, un segundo. English resources. Transcript. Um, Okay, here. Um, Advocate script in Spanish. Ok, vamos a ver si este enlace funciona. ¿Te funciona ese enlace, Silvia? ¿O Cristal, se funciona este enlace? ¿O te funcionó ese enlace?
Yeah, all of them have worked for me.
Ok,
I have it.
ok. Well, maybe, do you wanna, quizás puedes ser el organizer y Silvia el incline? You know what I mean? Like, because then you could just use the script and then she could be the tenant, but then know how to go through. Well, I guess there's only like 2 minutes, so, or you could talk about it together for 2 minutes. Would feel good.
Yeah, whatever. If you want to put us back in the room, I'm here.
Okay, let's try that. Let's see. Okay, I'll put you back in there into a new room one. Did you get the invite for it? Okay. When was the next break?
Victoria,
Hi, Miss Robinson.
there was no one in my room.
Oh my goodness. It looks
Mhm.
like Mr. Don Hamons was in there. Were you not able to see them?
I could not hear them, I mean, I could see their photo,
Oh, I'm sorry
but
about that.
I couldn't hear them. Are they here?
Not yet. They looks like they're stuck in the breakout room. I'm wondering if they were having issues. Oh, I'm sorry
Yeah,
that you didn't get practice.
yeah, because I tried to let them know because I came on camera,
Mm-hmm.
but and I tried to let them know I can't hear you, I can't see you.
Well,
So
there'll be more opportunity to practice, I promise. But I'm sorry that that activity didn't work out. You know, technology works one day and then doesn't the next. It's always
yeah,
hard doing these things on
no
Zoom.
worries.
But
I
there
was just
will
wondering,
be,
are they here?
I think so. There will definitely be more scenarios even today and tomorrow, that will go in breakout rooms. So we'll be sure to
No
troubleshoot
worries.
before. All right, y'all. I know that that was probably not enough time. I know that it was the first time that you all ever saw that script. And I know that it might have been the first time for some of you, um, participating as the advocate and not just the tenant. So thank you all for trying and being curious. Quick logistics reminder. As you re-enter the breakout rooms, please make sure you have to reselect your language. So if you need Spanish interpretation, you'll have to go to the bottom of your screen, select the icon or more options, the three dots, more options, depending, and select your Spanish or English language. So while we're in those conversations with folks, let me get to my notes.
See, I didn't do like I need to work on that.
Me too, Matthew. To be honest, it's very uncomfortable style of conversation because it's not necessarily natural, right? The structure of the conversation that we gave you has a very firm structure that moves the conversation towards the strategy of collective solutions. So I feel you in needing to continuously practice. That's something that Lisa, me, and Juan are constantly in practice with because it kind of changes based on who we're talking with and which step in the conversation we need to focus more on, depending on who we're in conversation with. So on the next slide, for the activity slide, we're talking still about as you were listening, we wanted to try to listening to the tenant respond to your conversation and your questions that you asked. We were trying to assess for if they were ready and willing to organize with you and take those collective solutions. So, how do you start to identify that organizing potential within that conversation? Some key things that you can listen out for are What relationship to their neighbors do they have already? Or what is their willingness to talk to their neighbors? What is their relationship to the target? So the target could be the landlord, it could be the corporation that owns all the properties, it could be the property manager, or it could be the master tenant, it could be HUD, right? Housing, or Section 8. So you just need to figure out who your target is and what that person you're in conversations with relationship is to the target. Important to think about in that conversation, what are the local conditions? Is there already a local rent control ordinance that we can lean on? Who are the players, right? Do we have a majority of tenant participation already? Are there enough neighbors fired up? Are we going to engage things like the rent board or a local building inspector, code enforcement, or a HUD officer? Are there similar problems within the building, the neighborhood, or the city? Are there clear violation of rights and retaliation, or habitability, or rent cap? So these are things we start to listen for to assess, is organizing and collective solutions going to work in this tenant situation? All right, y'all, shake it off. Let's all shake it off. Let's use our practice for our health and joy and shake off the awkwardness of that conversation and the awkwardness of being in the Zoom room. We're going to start to move into, now that we've talked about the history of organizing, we've done a little bit of practice of using an organizing structured conversation. Now we're going to review all of the California tenant laws that we've won through organizing over the next today and tomorrow. All right. So on the next slide, we want to first define who is considered a tenant here in California. So if you, number one, if you pay rent to the landlord, and number two, you live in the unit, then you are a tenant. Those are the two things that need to be fulfilled to determine if you are considered a tenant. If you pay rent and you live in the unit you pay rent for, then you are a tenant. All right? It makes no difference whether you have a written or a verbal contract. Both, it makes no difference. I was in a verbal contract for 4.5 years. It made no difference. I still had tenancy. Next slide. Here we're going to start to look at the patchwork of our tenant rights. And we say it's a patchwork because there's a lot of holes in the law, right? And not every, it doesn't cover or apply to all tenants, unfortunately. So the most protective law is the one that applies no matter what the level of government, right? Yeah, share all links in the chat, y'all. I'm seeing a question that came through. Share all links in the chat. We love, the chat is a resource. And is there a slide that should be on our screen? Yes. Are you not seeing the slides? It should look like a patchwork. Okay, Miss Mary Wendy, why don't you try at the top of the screen? Should be able to look, let me double check. Am I sharing my screen? Yeah, it says I'm sharing my screen.
Yes.
What's that?
Yes, you are sharing it.
Oh, thank you for confirming. Mary Wendy, if you want to try to look at the top of your screen and say view options, it would either say English, Victoria, or it'll say diapositivas. And so if it's diapositivas, that's the Spanish slide. So just make sure you are selecting. It looks kind of like a Windows tab. Okay, got it. Great. All right. So we'll only spend one or a few more minutes on this slide and then we'll take a break. Um, so there's kind of like a hierarchy when it comes to tenant protections, right? So the federal laws, they create kind of like a baseboard, right? So federal law applies to all people in the United States. And then there is the state law, then that kind of sits on top, and that applies to all folks in California. Then it gets really specific. It goes county law, and then at the very top, it's tenant city law, right? City or your town. So the most protective law is the one that applies no matter what level of government. So if the federal government law is kind of loosey-goosey and is not very strong, but your city or your town you live in passes a really strong rent control law, then that law applies. The most protective law always applies to the situation. All right. So in 2019, we were able to pass a Tenant Protection Act, which we hadn't been able to do in like 10 years since the foreclosure crisis. And what did the Tenant Protection Act do? It did these four things. It created just cause eviction protections. It created a rent cap of 5% plus the consumer price index. It established relocation payments and noticing requirements. All right, y'all. Let's go ahead and take another 10-minute break. Let's come back at 7:22 and we'll have Juan take us through what our protections are on security deposits as well as our rights to repairs. So go ahead and take another 10-minute break. Thank you. Hi, everyone. If you could hear my voice, please give a reaction or put an emoji in the chat. We're almost there. And we're getting into some of the technical stuff. So this will be a lot of fun. Thank you for the reactions. And I am going to move to the next slide and invite Juan up to talk about security deposits. Juan.
Hey y'all, thanks for hanging out with us. I know we're getting close to that hour, but a lot of the information that we're going to cover till the end of this session is really important. And so I'm excited to have the opportunity to share some of that with you, starting with security deposits. We're going to be talking about security deposits, and then I'll turn to some habitability legislation. When it comes to security deposits, we know that they, as tenants, are one of the highest forms of theft, and there really is no enforcement mechanism when it comes to these deposits. So in the next few slides, I'll be talking about a few protections and ways that you slash we as tenants can do our best to protect our deposits. And these are just some tactics and strategies that we have to share with you today. I'm sure some of you might have others in mind, so feel free to drop those in the chat along with any other questions or thoughts that come up as I talk about this. Next slide, please. So last year, thanks to the work and organizing of tenants like you all and like us all, the California legislature was able to pass a bill that limited the amount that a landlord can request for a security deposit. And that limit was set to 1 month's rent. So as of July 1st, 2024, a security deposit cannot exceed 1 month's rent, and that's regardless of whether a unit is furnished or not. So even when a security deposit includes or is called last month's rent, we know sometimes landlords use that language in a lease. A landlord can only charge up to 1 month's rent for the entire deposit. So, for example, if I'm signing or thinking about signing a new lease and I see that the rent is $2,000 per month, the maximum amount that a landlord can collect from me prior to the start of my tenancy would be $4,000. So that's $2,000 for the first month's rent and then $2,000 for the security deposit. Anything above that $4,000 limit is a no-no. So again, just be sure to keep an eye out as to whether or not the amount that you're being charged as you're signing a lease doesn't exceed first month's rent plus security deposit, which would equal 1 month's rent.
I have a
There,
question.
Mhm.
Can
Yeah,
can
please go ahead.
yeah, what determines a small landlord?
That is an excellent question.
Yeah, it's under 10 buildings that they own.
Okay,
Hmm.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, really great. Thanks for that question, Ms. Loretta. I know that's some of the sort of issues we find with some of these pieces of legislation that there are some exceptions, and so it's important for us to know what those are as well. So there is an exception here for the security deposit legislation for small landlords, as Victoria mentioned. It's also worth mentioning that tenants who are in the military, there is a limited security deposit there, similarly always equal to 1 month's rent. If I got that right, Victoria.
Yes, and I also want
Okay.
to amend my statement because you're right, Juan. There are always these caveats for defining small landlords in different situations. So I want you to review the rules for small landlords in the security deposit situation versus in the TPA, the Tenant Protection Act, small landlords, which is 10 or more. So I amend my previous statement.
And I see Caro in the chat also sharing that we need to remove that exception because small or big, they're all landlords and are all mean. And that's why the work never ends. You know, the advocacy need is always there because we do always need to make sure that our protections are completely solid. You know, there's no leakage there. So really appreciate you calling that out, Caro. Next slide, please. So in terms of deductions, a landlord can only withhold up to $125 without listing any deductions. So if a landlord is attempting to withhold more than that $125 mark, a tenant can ask for an itemized receipt, so you can get sort of specific line by line evidence of what those deductions are, and that can help fight any egregious charges that the landlord is attempting to make. The security deposit can be used to cover any unpaid rent, except for the COVID-19 rental debt period that lasted between March 2020 and September 2021. So as long as your unpaid rent isn't within that period, then the security deposit can be used to cover unpaid rent. Now, the landlord cannot deduct for ordinary wear and tear of a unit or to repair any damage or bad conditions that pre-existed the tenancy. So again, just making sure that the security deposit is with regards to your tenancy and isn't used to do some beauty projects or things that are sort of outside the normal scope of what's needed to make sure your home is habitable. During a natural disaster, landlord cannot take money for repairs out of your security deposit. So that's something that we definitely want to remind you all of, especially in light of wildfires, other climate change induced natural disasters. It's important for us to keep that in mind as well. Next slide, please. So how do we make sure as tenants that we recoup our security deposit as we are moving out? Well, 2 weeks prior to the move out date, you can request a walkthrough through the apartment with the landlord, sort of make sure that the state of the unit or the apartment as it was when you first moved in is as it is when you're moving out. Tenants are not required to pay for painting or professional cleaning unless it's specifically outlined or written in the lease agreement. So when you are signing your lease agreement, just be sure to look at the language carefully when it comes to the security deposit and the move out protocol and make sure that that isn't included in there. You are, as a tenant, entitled to your deposit back within 21 days of move out, and the landlord needs to communicate with you within that 21-day time frame. Otherwise, they essentially forfeit the opportunity to withhold any of that deposit. So that 21-day mark after you move out period is a really, really important sort of guidepost for getting your security deposit back. If you as a tenant were or are permanently displaced by natural disasters, then the landlord should return your security deposit in full. Is that right, Victoria? Great. Yeah. So again, there's these really important pieces of information that we should consider as it regards to natural disasters, which we know are becoming a daily reality for a lot of us here in California. There was another piece of legislation that was passed here in California, AB 414, and this has to do with how we receive our security deposits back. So, a tenant who made a security deposit or paid rent electronically has to receive the security deposit by electronic transfer as well, unless you as a tenant and your landlord agree to a different method. So this is just to make sure that the way that you had always been sort of exchanging money or funds with your landlord continues to be so when you get your security deposit back. Now we know, and I have had this experience with some tenants I've chatted with on the helpline, that landlords oftentimes don't want to easily give back the security deposit in full to tenants like us, and they really try their best to come up with reasonings or rationales for that. So if a situation ends up in a position where you as the tenant and your landlord can agree on how much or how you're receiving your security deposit back, you as a tenant can sue your landlord for that money. You can sue the landlord for the amount of the deposit and two times the amount of the deposit in damages. Now, the judge may give the tenant these additional damages if the landlord retained the deposit in bad faith. So there is always this opportunity to take the landlord to small claims court to get your money back and then some. Now, it's important to note that a tenant, can only sue for up to $10,000 in small claims court. So there is that limit there. Blessing, I see your hand up.
Yes. Hey, everyone. So my question is specifically around what happens after small claims and you win, but you can't get your money out of them. I know there's a process in the court itself. I went through this and I never was able to get my money, even though I won the judgment. And unfortunately, I'm still renting somewhere else, obviously, and I'm hoping that in the future, maybe I can do a better job to where even after I win my judgment, I somehow am able to get my money out of them.
I don't have a direct response, but I do know one of our partner organizations is called Debt Collective, and I think they have tools about how you can go through, I think at that point they would go through the collections process because you have the judgment. So I'll put their link in the chat. Um, they've been a great partner to us, the Debt Collective. They've been able to win $1 billion of loan forgiveness for predatory universities and student loans. So they have some pretty cool resources. But I don't actually know the small claims court process. My knowledge kind of stops once it goes to the courts since I'm not a lawyer.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks for the question, Blessing, and for the research sharing, Victoria. I also wanted to elevate another comment from Caro in the chat. Over 18 years ago, Caro took on a landlord in small claims court to recoup their security deposit. So we have an example of a win here in our midst, which is very, very exciting. So again, a reminder that these tactics and strategies can work. We are always excited to see them in action. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a scenario related to security deposits to maybe make what we just talked about a little bit more real. I'm wondering if somebody would like to volunteer to read this for the team here.
Let me try it.
Thank you, Caro.
Tenant vacates the property, leaving it in clean condition. The landlord deducts professional cleaning fees and fees to repaint at 300. Tenant needs their entire deposit returned to pay for the new deposit on her new lease. However, the new property manager is saying there will be additional deposit beyond the 1 month required amount for mail key fob, garage door, and the list of deposit for other amenities. What recourse does the tenant have?
Thank you so much, Caro. That was beautiful. So I want to open up the floor here a little bit to our collective learning group here. And I'm hoping that you all can respond in the chat to this question. I'm sure you all have some potential strategies in your brain based on what we just talked about, or some of the experiences or learning that you already came into this space with. So, what recourse does the tenant have in this situation? Feel free to drop in some potential responses in the chat. Great. I'm already seeing some examples coming in. Caro, small claims again. Yes. And again, it worked for you. It can work for other tenants as well, in this specific tenant in this scenario. For sure. Provide pictures, Richard. Yes, excellent. So along with, having your landlord do a walkthrough at move out, see the space for themselves, also taking pictures as you're moving in and as you're moving out. Possibly asking for itemized deductions first. Yes, incredibly important there to make sure you have full transparency. Caro, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Tomar fotos es bien importante.
Taking pictures is so important, so important. Now that we have phones, photos, videos at every single corner, the bathrooms, the
A
toilets,
mí eso me ayudó a ganar
that actually helped me
en mi
win
caso.
to win my
Llevaba
case.
fotos y en aquellos
I
tiempos
took
no
photos,
existían los
and at that
teléfonos
moment,
y yo
phones
no
didn't
conocía de
exist.
ningún grupo de
And I
inquilinos,
didn't know
pero
about
como que
any
tenía
tenants
un poco
union
de
or group,
noción de que
but I
salía
had sort of a
debería de
notion
tomar fotos por
that
cualquier
before
motivo
I left the place,
y
I
sí me
should have
sirvió mucho.
pictures, and that really
Y
helped me.
tener una
And
persona
also
con
having
usted
someone
que
with
le
you,
ayudó a limpiar,
someone that helped you
así sea un
clean,
amigo, un
whether
vecino,
it's a
quien sea, es
friend,
bien
a
importante
neighbor,
tener
doesn't really matter.
testigos.
It's really important that you have a witness with you.
Muchas gracias, Caro. Y estoy muy
Thank you so
de
much,
acuerdo
Caro.
de todo lo que compartió.
I
So,
agree with
Caro,
everything you
who, as you
shared.
know, had
So
a win in small claims court with their security deposit, shared that it's very important to take photos. Photos are such an important piece of evidence in situations like these, and really in most tenant situations. So, making sure you have those photos, you're taking pictures of every corner of the unit is really important. And then just having witnesses, people, family members, neighbors that can come to your unit and see what you're seeing is very important. Gracias, Carl. Crystal?
Um,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I also want to add, make sure that you document everything, that when you are having a conversation with them, make sure that you follow up with an email, so that everything that is discussed, you have it in writing. And as I said in the chat, contact the regional manager if you can't get anywhere with the landlord, if they have a regional manager. And most times they do, because a lot of these apartment complexes, um, they have the managers working there in the office, but they also have regional managers as well. And when you start saying, okay, if you can't resolve this, then you're going to force me to take you to court, then they will start to move on that. I had that happen to a friend of mine last month, and she was being ignored. And she was given the runaround by the manager. But, we helped her to get in contact with the main office, the regional, and at that point, they knew we better give her back her deposit within 21 days. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Fantastic. Those 2 cents are worth gold. Thank you so much for sharing that, Miss Loretta. And again, echoing what you're saying, The documentation, whether photo or in writing, super, super critical here. And going as deep in the communication chain as you need to, whether it's regional managers or somebody else. Thank you so much. Great. Crystal, did you want to share something before we moved on to
Yeah,
habitability?
I did have my hand up because I'm
Great.
driving. I wasn't able to pop in. The previous commenter said a lot of the things I was going to say in terms of documentation, but I think establishing that from the very beginning is critical, like for ourselves as tenants and the tenants that we work with. Every single thing should exist in writing. And so what I see named in that previous slide, it was lots of illegal stuff. Like you're not going to create a new directive for a new, like new terms for a security deposit and new fees. That's not legal. Or at least research it, right? Like to my understanding, none of that is legal. And also if you have photographs of the condition of the home, then we know that they can't charge you for repainting based on what we just learned. So also not, I would say immediately CC regional. Like don't even just like CC regional, CC tenants together, CC Vallejo Housing Justice Coalition. That's what we tell tenants so that the one tenant in one of our most impacted apartment complexes is never messed with. And it's because she sends emails to the entire chain. And it's interesting because she's literally the only tenant of like all 500 tenants that aren't messed with. So I think having feeling power like in our ability to advocate for ourselves is really important because here in Vallejo, a lot of these property managers know that folks are real disenfranchised and maybe don't write that letter and just communicate through phone calls, and they use that as a strategy to disempower us. So always put it in writing, always know your rights. And if you don't, reach out to Tenants Together or any of your local orgs. Thank you.
Thank you. Super, super helpful information for us to all remember. And especially as we dive into habitability, I mean, that documentation piece and the photo taking piece is going to be super important for habitability issues as well. So this is where we're going to turn to another tenant issue topic here that I'm sure many of us are very aware of. Next slide, please. So under California Civil Code, tenants are given the right to a habitable home. So if you are a tenant here in California, you have a right to a habitable home. As landlords, they must be able to provide a safe and sanitary place to live. And in the next slide, we'll go through just exactly how the law defines this. As we think about habitability, just remember that a landlord cannot legally terminate your tenancy if you claim that the landlord has not provided a habitable unit or a habitable home. This counts as a form of landlord retaliation and is punishable by fine. So, as Crystal said, we always have to remember to empower ourselves, to remember that we have rights, especially in the face of a landlord saying that we don't have any. It's in the civil code. We do. We have the right to a habitable home. Next slide. So, what exactly is a habitable home? Well, a habitable home is one that is free of, and I'm sure this is only just a small piece of list here. You all may have experiences with others, but when we think about habitability, it's a home that's free of damp walls, holes in the walls, peeling paint, a lack of or inadequate heat, missing or broken windows, pests like rats, roaches, and insects, things that jeopardize our safety, like unsafe stairs or railings, defective electrical wiring, and visible mold. Again, maybe you know people who have experienced some of these habitability issues in their own home. And it's, of course, not a situation that any of us as tenants should find ourselves in. Again, we are protected under the California Civil Code against living in any of these conditions. A piece of state legislation, AB 628, created a new habitability standard that requires that landlords provide Also, a working stove and refrigerator in all units for new leases signed on or after January 1st of this year. So after January 1st, 2026, landlords also have to make sure that rental units have a working stove and refrigerator. So that essentially now becomes part of a habitable home as well. This is very exciting and a long time coming. So under AB 628, we also have some additional pieces that have been added under habitability protections. So I mentioned a working stove and a working fridge. This means that they are in good working order and that you as a tenant are capable of safely generating heat for the stove and safely storing your food for the refrigerator. Repairs must be done in a timely manner under this new piece of legislation unless it is urgent. So a landlord must repair or replace the stove or the refrigerator within 30 days notice of a recall, for example. A tenant and a landlord may also agree when the lease is signed for the tenant to choose to provide their own refrigerator if they choose to do so. If you as a tenant no longer want to provide your own refrigerator, you must notify the landlord with a 30-day notice. And at the end of that 30-day notice, the landlord must provide a refrigerator in working order. So at the end of the day, if you as a tenant decide, you know what, I don't want to furnish my unit with my own refrigerator. After all, the landlord still has to comply with this new piece of legislation and provide one on their behalf. Next slide, please.
Already have all this stuff.
I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No.
No worries.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I was not on
Oh,
mute.
no problem. No problem.
Okay,
It happens
cool.
to me all the time. If you do end up
Oh,
having a question, just feel free to let us know.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we're going to talk about mold and bed bugs, which again are just two of those examples that we had on that list of potential habitability issues that we have protection against. When it comes to mold, a tenant's home must be weatherized and properly ventilated to avoid issues like mold in the first place. If you are concerned or you know other tenants who are concerned about potential mold, you can and should request repairs from your landlord. Low-income tenants specifically may even qualify for state weatherization programs, and they will work with the landlord to help make some of those needed repairs. So there are programs that can even help landlords comply with some of these pieces of legislation and make sure that your home is habitable. Landlords are required to provide tenants with a mold booklet. I believe this is when you're signing your lease, if I'm not mistaken, Victoria. So make sure that you have that information from the beginning. Visible mold is covered by the Habitability Code in California, but California does not have any laws around mold prevention or remediation, except San Francisco. San Francisco is the exception here. If concentration of mold is high in your unit, you can try to recover damages in court to compensate for some of the losses experienced due to this issue, and the judge could determine that the landlord was engaged in negligence. So again, here's another example where there is a potential legal pathway to get recourse for some of these damages. For bed bugs, a landlord must provide tenants with information on bed bug identification and control, again, similarly as part of you signing on to live in the unit, and is obligated to maintain a unit free of bed bugs throughout your tenancy. You should never find yourself as a tenant in a situation where you are having to live with bed bugs. The Federal Housing Administration has also issued guidelines that prohibit the landlord from charging tenants in subsidized housing specifically for the cost of bed bug treatment. So in that case, the cost should not fall on the shoulders of the tenant. Next slide, please. Great. And I see some resources popping up in the chat, so feel free to take a look at those after today's session. So how exactly do we as tenants request some of the repairs that are needed to treat some of these habitability issues? Well, some of this has already come up in your thoughts and your perspectives. Communicating with the landlord in writing is key, as some of our friends here shared. So whether that's pictures and videos, it's texts, it's emails, it's writing experiences in a journal, documentation, and that quote unquote paper trail is super important when it comes to habitability issues. When the issues started popping up, how extreme the issues are, and again, making sure you have evidence of that throughout the issue itself. Calling your city or county's code enforcement agency is a strategy that we often recommend. You can quickly Google the name of your city, the name of your county, and code enforcement. Oftentimes, they'll have on their website a phone number that you can reach out to submit a complaint. And if you live in a city that has a rent board, you can also communicate with that rent board with issues like this as well. Now, as Victoria shared earlier during this session, collective power is key, and there is always power in numbers. So, signing on as neighbors, as a building, as a collective unit of tenants is going to really put a lot of pressure on the landlord to address these issues. And oftentimes, if you're experiencing a habitability issue, it's more than likely that your neighbor or neighbors are as well. So strength is in numbers is very important here. Signing collective letters to landlords is a really viable strategy in cases like these. Other potential strategies include making the repairs yourself and then submitting a case to small claims court to recoup some of those investments and some of that money back, especially if the landlord refuses to refund that money. Now, of course, this might take a long time away from the work and it involves a legal process. There is also a potential strategy of repairing and deducting the amount of the repairs from your rent. This is definitely a more risky, we're getting into risky strategy territory here. And so for this and for the next strategy, it's super important to document everything. The reason that it's risky is because if you don't make full rent payment, a landlord could potentially serve you with a 3-day notice to pay or quit. However, withholding rent is an affirmative response to unlawful detainer summons and complaint. So again, documentation is key here and is very much key for the last strategy on this slide, which is a rent strike, and probably the most risky strategy here. And we found that this has the most success if it's done collectively with neighbors and as sort of one unit instead of as an individual strategy. Caro, I see your hand up. Veo su mano.
Gracias. Con lo de deducir y reparar, pues
Thank
como
you.
lo
About
dice, es muy arriesgado,
uh,
pero
deducing
si
and
se va a hacer,
repairing, it's very
sería
risky,
como
but
el último
if
recurso
you were to
después
do
de
it,
que
it would
ya
be
le
like the last
informó
resort.
tal vez hasta 2 veces al
Maybe they
dueño, ya llamó
informed
a los
the owner a few
departamentos
times, they called any
apropiados
department
y
that
nadie
they needed to,
responde. Tal
and
vez sería el
no one
último
answers.
recurso repararlo,
Maybe it would
pero
be
ya tiene
the last
mucha
choice to repair
información de
it,
que
but
ya avisó y
there's a
nadie
lot
está
of information
escuchando.
that they mentioned it and they're not
Porque
listening.
si no hace eso, pues sí, el riesgo
Because
es
if they don't do
perder
that,
la
then
vivienda.
the risk is losing the home.
Claro, Caro. Muchas gracias. So Caro was sharing that repairing and deducting, and then I'll also add rent striking. It should be or is a sort of last resort strategy here after you've tried some of the other strategies on the slide. So court enforcement, collective letters to the landlord, because of course the risk here is that you might receive a pay or quit notice and potentially have your housing at risk. So again, some of these other strategies on the earlier bullets on the slide are a good place to start. Victoria?
Yes, and I think, Juan, if you agree with me, I think this is probably a good spot to end. And the next
Yes. Mhm.
slide we can bring into day two.
Yeah,
So,
I totally
okay.
agree. Mhm. We're almost
Any,
at the end here.
yeah. Any questions, y'all, for Juan and me on security deposits or habitability with the last 3 minutes of tonight? Any strategies to share?
Nomás con lo último de reparar, que siempre sea
Just
un
with the last thing
profesional
about
con
repairing,
licencia para poder
they should
recuperar
always
su
be a
dinero.
professional with a license to be able to recoup that money.
De acuerdo, Caro. Caro shared that when it comes to making repairs, make sure that the person that's doing those repairs has a license, is, a reputed professional, especially so you can make sure that, they provide the proper documentation that you'll need as part
Yeah.
of your paper trail.
And you can also get a receipt then too, so that if you need to deduct later on or you need to recoup that money, then you have the receipt as well from the company or the repair person. Thank you for sharing, Caro. All right. I think, Lisa, should we stop recording here? We can stop recording and then we can stop share